different. When we teach this material, it's important to sort of keep track of the forest and the trees a little bit, okay? So there is some subtlety about what depth first search does and what breadth first search does. And it's important to see that and understand it. But it's probably more important for you to come away with, when we talk about a graph problem, whenever we talk about a graph problem in here, an algorithms problem, there's going to be two levels at which you should understand it, one more important than the other. The most important thing is, what is this problem and why are they bothering talking to me about it? Okay? So if I talk to you about, last class we briefly mentioned this idea of articulation vertices. Vertices whose deletion will break the graph, right? We mentioned that at the end of the class. It's important to file away in your head, hey, I now know that some people think that's an interesting concept, okay? And if you see it again at some other point in your life, you can recall why it is that there is this idea that you can break it apart. And Skiena told me a graph and that there was a fast algorithm for it. So recognizing that there is a problem that has a name and that there exists an algorithm for is important and is not that complicated. That's easier than understanding the details of it. On the other, second part of it, once you understand what the problem is, understanding what the algorithm is also a good idea. But that, in principle, can be looked up, except on the exam, when you have a need for it. Okay? Any questions? So I'd like to mention today, I'm not going to talk about what is one of the most important, let's say, graph algorithm problems. Okay? That recognizing that it has a name, okay, and that this is a thing to do is an important idea. And it has to do with the problem on directed graphs, okay? It is topological sorting, okay, which is arguably the most important problem on directed graphs, okay? It has to do with whether or not a graph has a cycle in it, okay? If we look at the graph on the board, if you look at it, it is not a tree. Does everybody see that that's not a tree? It has too many edges on it to be a tree. On the other hand, it also does not have any cycles. Why? Why isn't this a cycle? It seems to go around. Well, it has to do with the fact that it's a directed graph. You can drive from here to there, and you can drive from here to there, but you can't drive back this way unless you ignore the direction of the arrow, right? Which is, not allowed, okay, when you drive in most places, okay? So this graph, what is interesting about this particular graph is that if you look at it, it doesn't have any cycles. It has a tree. It is not a tree. It is directed, and it does not have any cycles. Is there any graph that is undirected and not a tree that doesn't have a cycle? Let's think about undirected graphs for a moment. Here is an undirected graph without a cycle in it. Does everybody agree with that? But that looks like a tree. The moment I add any extra edge to it, ding, 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 I have got a cycle. Does everybody agree with that? So, but in directed graphs, okay, we may have directed graphs that do not have cycles, okay? And a graph that does not have such a thing is called a directed acyclic graph, okay? Or a DAG for short, okay? Any questions? So recognizing strings are a DAG, okay? Sometimes you encounter a directed graph. Sometimes DAGs are acyclic, and sometimes they are not acyclic, okay? Can anybody think, before we get into too many more details, of a graph that is directed that does not have any cycles? Okay, let's see if anybody has any canned examples. I have my own, but has anybody encountered any directed graphs in their life which don't have cycles? Okay. Well, I know you guys have, okay? One thing you have, the reason why I know this is because you all are computer science majors. So everybody, well, essentially all of you are computer science majors. And what has to happen to be a computer science major? Okay? Certainly, you have come in and, had to take classes. There has been some kind of flow chart of classes you have to take to become a CS major, right? You had to take CSE 110. That was our introductory, very introductory thing. And that was a prerequisite to 214. That was introductory, 114. That was introductory programming, right? And that was a prerequisite for 214, which was data structures. And that was hopefully a prerequisite for 373, which is algorithms. Are there any other courses in this chain? 113, that was our discrete math class. Was that a prerequisite for something? What was that a prerequisite for? 213, that was the second discrete math class. And what was that a prerequisite for? 303. And again, these things at some point, especially in the olden days, they used to meet. Okay? So anyway, what I claim is that the courses in your program, the vertices can be thought of, they can be thought of as a prerequisite graph for all the courses in computer science. Is that right? Where for every course there's a certain number of prerequisites in it. Okay? Does everybody see that? And a prerequisite is a directed edge because you have to take this course before you take that course. Does everybody see that? This graph is directed. Does everybody agree? There's a course, you have to take one before the other. Is this course acyclic? Does this graph have any cycles in it? You're saying no. Why doesn't this graph have any cycles in it? Well, you're saying because if it was a higher course, you wouldn't need it for another course. I would argue that more if it did happen. If there was a cycle in this, it would be a set of courses that nobody could ever take. It'd be a dream course from a certain administration point of view, right? If this course requires that as a prerequisite, and that requires that as a prerequisite, and that requires that as a prerequisite, there's no way anyone could take any of these courses. Does everybody agree with that? So this is an example of a directed graph that by definition has to be a DAG. Does everybody agree with that? Any questions? Okay. So a lot of courses in general tend to be a DAG. Okay. And if you have a DAG, okay, one thing that you have that is very important is something that we will call, that is called a topological sort, or a topological ordering it to it. It is a way to somehow take, if we thought of these as courses, the course example is actually pretty good. You as students are going to want to take a sequence of courses, right? And what you're going to want to do is take a chain of courses. It's important that you take that every course you've taken, you've already satisfied all the prerequisites. Does everybody agree with that? You couldn't come in here as a freshman and say, hey, I want to take the algorithms class. Here it's good. Skiena's a good teacher, right? I want to take his class. The answer was no, you can't take it until you've satisfied all the prerequisites, right? So you need an ordering somehow of the courses, an ordering of the vertices of the graph, such that you could take them without violating any constraints. Does that seem like a natural thing? Certainly in context of courses, it's a natural thing. Maybe it's a little bit more complicated because you have semesters and you want to take more than one course a semester, but let's not ignore that for now. Somehow the act of satisfying your program involves satisfying basically coming up with an order that doesn't violate constraints. Okay? Any questions? So a topological sort, what is it? It is an ordering of the vertices so that if we lay out the vertices from left to right, okay, we don't violate any constraint. All the edges go pointing from left to right. Does everybody see this? I claim that this graph is a DAG. Can someone give me an ordering? Let's see if we can pinch that together, an ordering here of these vertices such that, such that we satisfy this. Okay? Any ideas on how we can do this? Which vertex can be first? Why can G be first in the ordering? It has no prerequisites. It has nothing here. So certainly G can be first. Now that I've taken G, I've satisfied those prerequisites, right? Who can be next? It looks like, who can I take? Well, F, unfortunately, has somebody else as a prerequisite, right? So I can't take F. But I certainly can take A. It looks like now A has no prerequisites. So let me take A. Once I take A, okay, now which course can I take next? It looks like I could take, well, I still can't take F because I have to take C first. Maybe I take C now, but I have to take B before C. Seems clear now I can take B. And once I take B, I've satisfied all of these prerequisites. Does everybody see that? Who can be next? Well, now C's chance to shine is, right? So C is clearly the only guy I can take, so yes. And after I take C, who can I take? Well, there's a chain from F to E and E to D. So F, E, D is the order I have to take the remaining classes. Does everybody agree that? If I take F, I cover this. Take E, I cover that. Any questions? So this is a topological sort of this graph. As it happens, it's the only topological sort. Does everybody kind of agree with that? My hands were forced at each time. Okay? And there was only one way to cruise through these courses. Any questions? If I dropped, let's just think about this though. Is there some constraint here that if I dropped it, I might now have more than one way to take these courses? Does anyone have a constraint here maybe? That if we dropped it, yeah? If I got rid of the edge from C to F, let's say that this no longer existed. I decided it wasn't really a prerequisite. Now what orders are possible? Let's think about it. Does this open up possibilities? Certainly G still has to be first. I think we're convinced of that, right? But now I can go immediately to F. Does everybody see that? And once I do F, I could do F here. Or I could have done F here. Or I could have done F here. Does everybody see that? Some graphs have many topological orders, right? A lot of flexibility in how you can go through them. Others have only one if they're a DAG. What graphs have no topological orders through them? Undirected, well, if it's undirected, the idea of a prerequisite doesn't exist, right? If you can drive on either end of the road, which do you have to do first? Seems to me that if you have an undirected graph, there's no constraint as to what you can do. What kind of directed graphs will have zero topological orders? Those that have some cycle. If I introduce a cycle of constraints, I am doomed. There is no way I can process them all respecting the constraints. Okay? There's no way I can order the edges to always go left to right. Because if there's a cycle, somebody is going to go from right to left. Does everybody see that? Any questions about topological sorting? If you see a DAG, you instinctively should feel, I want to topologically sort it. Okay? That's somehow a natural operation on any DAG. Almost the first thing you want to do on any DAG, to do anything interesting on it. Any questions about that? Okay? So this is an important point. Okay? There's lots of different things in life that have this sort of same property as course scheduling. Okay? Where there are precedence constraints. One cute example I had to do had to do with getting dressed. Okay, every morning I get dressed. For variety, I may try to do it in different ways. What do I have? I have socks. I have shoes. I have pants. I have underpants. What else do I have? A shirt. Are there any precedence constraints where some of these things have to get done before other things? Okay, yeah. What do I have to put on before something else? Socks have to go before shoes. Does everybody see that? What other things have to go before other things? Underpants before pants, or else they'd look pretty funny, right? Underpants have to go on before pants. What about any other constraints here? Does that satisfy them? Are there any other constraints? I think that pants had better go on before shoes. Any other constraints? That I think pretty much sums it up, right? So how can I get dressed in the morning? Okay, how many ways? Let's say A. Let's call this A, B, C, D, E. How many different ways can I get dressed in the morning? Okay. It should be clear because there's no constraint. I can put my shirt on any time I want. Okay. What's the first thing I have to put on? Is there a first thing I have to put on? No. What are my choices for first thing I can put on? I could put on my shirt. I could put on my socks. I could put on my underpants. Does everybody agree with that? All told, there are a wide variety of different orders that are consistent with it. And again, if anybody invented some sort of a new garment, okay, such that it would cause a cycle in this kind of constraint, people couldn't get dressed anymore. Okay? Any questions about that? Okay? Again, when there is an order where there's a set of precedence constraints, be it course prerequisites, be it getting dressed, be it jobs, okay, you have a topological sorting problem, okay, to figure out how to do it. Any questions? Let me show you one other, just because, again, it's important to understand why these things came up, okay? One thing I do is let's say my research area has to do with DNA sequencing. Okay, you've all heard of the Human Genome Project, and you know that, well, you may not, you know that somehow the human genome was sequenced. This was a big deal. Okay, how was it sequenced? Well, they do laboratory experiments where they get data from genes, which give you small pieces of sequence, okay, strings. And they then give these randomly sampled pieces to a computer scientist like me, and they say, put them together. So you try to find where is there a small string, okay, which contains all the fragments. And one would argue that if you sample enough pieces of the string, of the sequence, and you try to put them together to find the shortest possible string that contains them, the argument is that this is the string that they came from. Okay? Any questions? You may have some objections to this, but this is the basic idea of how genomes get sequenced. Any questions? Yeah? What is the genome? The genome is the DNA sequence that describes you. You look different than him. Why do you look different than him? On some genetic level, you are different than him. Okay? And every person in this room is described by, there's somehow a recipe for how to make you that is given by a string of length 3 billion of patterns of A, C's, G's, and T's that describe how to make you. Okay, when you talk about biology, you probably heard what DNA is. DNA is somehow the molecule that describes how to make you. And you can describe that molecule by a string, it turns out, a string of characters. Okay? And every person has a different sequence, which is why you look different than him. But more to the point, all of you look more like each other than you do like a chimpanzee. Right? Does everybody agree with that? You may look around the room, have some objections, but I assure you that's true. And the reason is because your basic genomic sequence, okay, of humans is all very, very similar. Okay? And so the Human Genome Project was to try to sequence describe the pattern of A, C, G's, and D's that a representative person had. Okay? This turns out to be important for medical and scientific reasons. It was a big deal. Okay? But a lot of the work was done by computer scientists. It's a side point of view. Algorithms, people like me, had an important role there because these sequencing machines spat out these substrings. To put them together is a very complicated problem. Any questions? Well, one thing, part of information that they can give you to make it easier to put together, it turned out. Let me see if I can get this thing. Ka-chunk. No, okay. One other thing, that piece of information they give you that helps you put it together is sometimes they will give you that this particular sequence, abraca, occurs before dabraca. Okay? Suppose as additional information, they not only give you which these sort of individual parts of sequence to try to assemble. Maybe for certain pairs they can tell you, hey, I have reason to believe that this is to the left of that. Right? Does everybody agree with that? You know, it turns out they can sometimes, for certain pairs, they can give you that information. And if so, this order of to the left of or right of has to be a DAG, unless they made a mistake, right? If I have told you that this fragment here is to the left of this one, and this one is to the left of that one, doesn't that mean that this implies that this is to the left of that? If someone tells me this fragment is to the left of that, and this fragment is to the left of that, and this fragment is to the left of that, what does that tell you? That they're lying, right? It can't be consistently like that, right? But bottom line, if you want to resolve and untangle what all these precedence constraints are, the claim would be, if I gave you the vertex, this graph of precedence constraints, one of the first things you would like to do is to lay out the vertices, meaning the strings, in order such that all the constraints go from left to right like they should. Does everybody agree that's part of a job of assembling it? In fact, really what assembling it is then finding the right order. There's a lot of different topological sorts of this DAG. The argument would be that the real assembly job is finding the right one. Okay? Any questions about that? So you should be clued into looking for when in your life is there a DAG. Okay? And what does it mean to topologically sort it? And how many such orderings are there? Any questions? Yes? How long is a DNA strand? Okay. It turns out that if we ignore, again, the answer in anything in biology turns out to be it's complicated. Okay? But on a simplest basis, every person has about 3 billion. What is that? 3 billion. That's 3 million. That's 3 billion bases of DNA. Okay? So implicitly in you there is a string of length 3 billion describing how to make you. Okay? Any questions? The machines that spit out parts of the string for reading it turn out to only give you a piece of length about 500 in practice. So you take a large number of pieces of length 500 to put them together to get a piece of length 3 billion. Does everybody agree with that? You need a lot of pieces. And to actually put all that many pieces together, okay, is a complicated business. Okay? Any questions? Any questions about the DNA people are interested in? Yes, okay. No, so it's a question of information. It's like a puzzle. They come to the computer scientist. They don't want to tell me about biology. They want to say, you, put data together, right? You, we've got a bunch of, we tell you that, we know that this string is contained in the magic string. We know this string is contained in the magic string. We know this string is in the magic string, this string is in the magic string, and this string is in the magic string. Put them together. Tell me what the magic string is. Okay? And maybe I'll say, well, wait, this is too hard. I need more information. I said, okay, you want more information? I happen to know that this string occurs to the left of that string. And this string happens to occur to the left of that. Does that help you? Well, certainly it can't hurt me, right? I can always ignore it, right? You can give me a lot of information. I can always ignore it. It can't hurt me, okay? But if it's truthful, it should help me. It might very well help me put it together, right? And it turns out that some types of experiments give you some kind of information like that to help discombobulate it. Any question about that? Okay? Should be believable that if someone gives me that information, it's possible for them to have that information. Okay? It should be clear that it can't hurt me and might help me resolve what the right string is. Okay? The abracadabra. Okay? Any questions? Okay? The real lesson here is topological sort of a DAG can be a useful thing to do. Okay? Any questions here? Fairly often in my life, I have been asked algorithms questions. Oh, how do I do this? And I tell you, topologically sort it. And then the person crawls away, because that's basically what their problem is. Any questions? Anybody else have any DAGs that they have seen in their life that anyone remembers? You, yeah. Unification problem in logic programming. Okay? I don't know enough about that problem. But what I do know is, so I don't know what a unification problem is. I don't want you to teach me. But what I'm going to guess it has something to do with is that you're trying to progress a search in a particular way. Okay? And again, there's some directionality to this search. Okay? And if there is some chain of reasoning that goes back to itself, somehow it's not a chain of reasoning that is unambiguous, right? If this derives that, if this derives that, if this derives that, that then is a logical chain of reasoning. If there's sort of a cyclic going back, then maybe you get a contradiction, and that's maybe you're nodding. That's probably the cyclic thing that you're talking about. Any questions? So topological sorting is your friend. Any questions? Okay. How can we do a topological sort of a graph? Okay. Can anybody suggest an algorithm for it? There are a couple of different algorithms to topologically sort a DAG. How might you go about doing it? Let's think a little bit. Let's come back here. Here's our DAG. How might you topologically sort it? Any kind of a procedure come to mind? We sort of did it. Yes, what are you doing? You're saying find a vertex of in degree 0 and saying, congratulations, you can be first. Does everybody agree with that? If I have no prerequisites, I can be first. Does everybody agree with that? And now I sweep through the graph and find somebody else with now that I've tilled those prerequisites, somebody else with no prerequisites. Does everybody agree with that? Repeatedly searching for the in degree 1 0 vertices would be a way of finding it. Okay? How much time would that take? Let's stop and think about it. Or maybe, let's just think about it. A trivial analysis, if I was going to do it in a brute force way, would be what? I'm going to make n passes through the graph, saying, hey, are you an in degree 0 vertex, right? How much time will it take to tell if you're an in degree 0 vertex? You say what? N squared? Why n squared? So what you're saying is, okay, you're giving me an algorithm that's saying n squared because the time to find, you're saying to find, is there an in degree 0 vertex? You want to say you can do in linear time, in the number of vertices. Even that's not obvious to me, come to think of it. Okay, how do I tell from an adjacency list how many vertices go into me? Okay, let's think about it. That's not completely trivial yet, is it? Let's think about that. If I give you a DAG and I give you an adjacency list representation, How do I find out what vertices, whether anything goes into vertex x? Is there an edge of the form yx? That's really what we're asking, right? How would we tell if there is an in degree and an edge going into vertex x? How would we do it in an adjacency list? Search the adjacency list. Which adjacency list? All of them or one of them? I have to cruise through all of them. Does everybody agree with that? So in the brute force way of what you're doing, you're saying go through the entire graph and figure out who has nobody going into them. And that might be order n plus m, because that's how big my adjacency list is, right? And I'm then going to do this n times, one for each cycle. If you're not careful about how you do it, certainly that looks like that could be something like order nm. Does everybody agree with that? Any questions? Yeah? If you use an adjacency list matrix, immediately you're dooming yourself to order n squared. Does everybody agree with that? I'm going to show you I can do it in order n plus m. Okay? So I will beat, certainly this time, I will beat this time, right, on a sparse graph. Okay? Any questions? Yes, question. Okay, you're saying, wait a second. It's not necessarily going to be as bad as you said, as I said it was, right? Maybe by using a cleverer data structure, I can make this faster. And I will tell you that, in fact, you are right. Okay? By doing a clever data structure, okay, I can do it in linear time, order n plus m. Okay? But I don't want to show you that way to do a topological sort. Okay? You have this idea now of how you might do it. You're saying with a cleverer data structure, that's going to be the key to making it run real fast. Okay? Question? Okay, you're suggesting a clever data structure. Let's say that you're right. But let's say I don't want to tell you that way to do it. You sort of say, I don't need to tell you. You've already figured that way out, right? Let me show you. We were talking about depth first search. Let me show you how depth first search, on the other hand, lends itself to an interesting, let me just come back here for a second. Depth first search lends itself to a kind of really slick way of doing it. What do we know about depth first search on a graph or a directed graph? If here's a vertex x, if x discovers y, which vertex was first discovered? Okay? Which was the first of those vertices that was discovered, x or y? X had to have been discovered, right? We couldn't have done anything from x until after it was discovered, right? So certainly the discovery time of x is going to be before the discovery time of y. Does everybody agree with that? Which vertex will be finished with first, x or y? When we discovered it, we did DFS from x. When we discovered y, now we started doing a search from y, right? When did we get back to doing x? Only after y was done. Does everybody agree with that? So what do we know about the finishing times? Y finished before x did. It started after x did. Does everybody agree with that? And we talked about finishing times and stuff like that. So here is a very simple algorithm, once you have your depth first search down, for doing topological sort. Label each of the reverse order, okay, vertex in the reverse order that it was finished. Okay? Let's think about it. Which was the last vertex to finish? Okay? Yeah? The root. Okay? If we start from a vertex somehow, okay, the last one to finish was sort of the root of our search. Okay? Unless, and it gets a little bit trickier here, what if we add in a depth first search? Okay? Let's say we started out in a directed graph, our depth first search from here, right? Everything that was reachable from it would have finished, right? But there might have been some, if it was a DAG, there might have been some vertex that reached it that was not reachable from it, right? Does everybody see here that if we started doing depth first search from my underwear, okay, is it, well, okay, I'm not sure if my underwear is the right place to start, okay? But I mean, the point is that if we started somewhere in the middle of this chain, we do a depth first search, we will visit everybody who's reachable from that point. If it was a directed graph, there might be somebody who reached this guy, right? Who is going to be should be first in topological order? This one or this one, A or B? Who should be the first one in topological order? B, right? Who has a later finishing time? A or B? Well, A finished. If we had started from B, A would have finished before B. Does everybody agree with that? If we started from A would be finished, and then we'd be looking for more work to do, and we'd say, hey, wait, we never looked at B, did we? You would have to have a later finishing time. Does that make sense? Again, the subtleties of depth first search on directed graphs are a little different than undirected graphs. But does everybody see that somehow if you're going to make it a point that your algorithm is start from some vertex, visit everybody I can reach, then find somebody else. Once I've reached everybody, if there's vertices I haven't searched yet, start from there. The later guy is going to be the one that is going to finish last. Yes? Or you're saying do the start from the vertex whose in degree is 0. That might be be true. Okay? But there might be more than one. That doesn't completely solve my problem. There might be more than one vertex of in degree 0. Right? Does everybody see this? Here's a case where, you know, let's say I had shirt. What else could I put on before doing anything? Has an in degree 0 when you get dressed. Maybe some other garment. What? A watch. Okay, I can put on my watch anytime, right? In fact, just so you know, I put it on right when I come out of the shower. That's actually the first one I put on. Any questions here? Okay? Any questions? Okay? So that doesn't solve my problem, right? Do you see that? It's still a case that I'm going to have to explicitly check, have I hit every single vertex? And if not, start a search there. That's what I did on connected components, if you remember, right? And it's a similar thing I've got to do here. Any questions? So what is my argument? I claim that if you process the vertices in reverse order of when they are processed, you get a DAG. Why is that? Let's think what happens to directed edge x goes to y when I encounter it in exploring x. One of three things could happen. Here I go, I'm doing a search, here is x. Oh look, it goes to y. What could happen? If y had not been discovered before, okay, I'm the discoverer of it. Who goes first in topological order, x or y? X has to go first. Regardless, if there's an edge x, y, x had better go first, right? Who's going to have an earlier finishing time? Y, right? So I'm okay if it was undiscovered. What if it had been discovered but not completed? And this is a little bit more subtle, okay? But let's think about it. Who in the course of a depth-first reversal, there's this tree of vertices that I've built, right? Who has not yet been completed? If I go to a vertex that has been discovered but not completed, that I claim is going to be a back edge. And what's wrong with having a back edge in a graph, in a DAG? Creates a cycle. It's not a DAG. Its DAGness has been compromised, right? So this is not forbidden. Don't have to worry about it. What if, on the other hand, it had been completed? That was the case that we just looked at, right? If the vertex I'm going to had already been completed, okay, then it will be labeled before X and everything is fine. Okay, any questions? So the neat thing is, in fact, that boom, how do I do topological sort? If I already have my depth first search, this is topological sort. What do? Whenever I finish with a vertex at the end, I push it onto a stack of vertices to be in topological order, right? Because this is a process late was called at the time the vertex was being finished. If I want them in reverse order of finishing time, whenever I finish a vertex, boom, pop it on the stack. And this is it. Any questions about that? Turns out a lot of the subtle, efficient, linear time graph algorithms are very natural and easy in terms of steps that you're doing during the traversal. Okay? So think about this one. This is going to be the simplest of the applications of depth first search that are convincing. And you should see why that works. That's kind of an important point. Any questions about that? Any questions at all? Okay, let me think about whether I want to go through the next one or not. Let me just talk about this problem, another problem on directed graphs, because I think it's important to know about problems, right? So you can recognize what your problem is. If I have a directed graph is strongly connected, okay, if and only if there is a directed path between any two vertices in the graph. Okay? Is a DAG a strongly connected graph? No way, right? I can get from, in a DAG, I can maybe get to a vertex. But there is no vertex I can get to that can get back to me, right? That would be a cycle, right? A strongly connected graph is an anti-DAG in some way, okay? I don't want to carry that too far, but it's clear it's a different beast. Any questions? So should a road network, let's think about a city. Cities have one-way streets on them, right? Should city street networks be strongly connected? What would happen if a city did not have strongly connected road network? Then there would be a way to drive someplace, okay? And not get back to home, right? Does everybody agree with that? Maybe there'd be some bridge to nowhere that once you cross it, boom, it doesn't mean you're stuck. You can maybe keep driving. You could imagine a world where, let's say the graph looked like this, right? There's two cities, okay? And you can live in this part of the city and everything's fine, right? But once you cross that bridge, it's all over for you, right? You can go drive around here, but you can't get back. Any questions? Everybody agree that would be a bad thing, okay? So city networks need to be strongly connected. Does everybody agree with that? And a lot of graphs are naturally either strongly connected or sometimes if they're not strongly connected, you want to find what pieces do they break into that are strongly connected. If you look at this graph here, okay, this is a cycle. This is strongly connected, right? This is a cycle. It is strongly connected. This thing here, there's no other way. This is strongly connected and this is strongly connected. Note that this forms four pieces. And you can get from this piece to that piece. You can get from this piece to that piece. You can get from this piece to that piece and this piece to that piece. But there is no way to get home once you have left your piece. Does everybody see that? Any questions? Okay. So this is the problem of testing if a graph is strongly connected, or equivalently, identifying all the pieces that are strongly connected. Any questions about that? Any other things in life that they can think of that are should be strongly connected? I think the city network is a clear one. Okay? But quite often, if you take a graph that is sort of in pieces, the pieces larger, often the sensible pieces of a directed graph are the strongly connected components. Question? Chains? Well, a chain, if you think of a, well, again, I don't know, okay, what would a chain mean? A chain should be strongly connected because if it's weakly connected, it breaks, I guess. Okay? Any question? A circulatory system, that's actually maybe a good one, right? Circulatory system, I hadn't thought about that, but veins and arteries only work one way. Okay? As I know, I'm pretty sure I'm right about that, right? That there's somehow blood flows one way in a vein or an artery. What happens if it was not strongly connected? Blood would flow into here and it would never leave, right? If you have this heart pumping, bump, 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 and getting enough oxygen from the lungs, that's what it does, right? This part here would never get any oxygen, right? Or it would just accumulate so much blood. That's, I guess, the other possibility, right? It accumulates too much blood and it becomes, a swollen thing or an aneurysm or God knows what. Any questions about it? Your circulatory system is strongly connected, right? Or if not, something isn't working. Good example. I like that example. Any questions about it? So how could you test, okay, if something is strongly connected? Okay? Can someone give me an algorithm to test if a graph is strongly connected? Okay? Perhaps slow, but correct. Okay? Yes. So one thing that I could do is, you're saying that somehow to make sure that for every point there's always a way to get back. Okay? The answer is that's yes, that's right. That's sort of a definition of it, sort of. Okay, so I'm not going to think of what that would mean exactly. How would I tell if it's strongly connected? Well, I guess what I would say is the adjacency matrix. Maybe what you're saying here, that I think I believe now in detail. If I built an adjacency matrix of who could get from one person to another, right? If I take a look from vertex 1, who could I reach? How could I figure out who I can reach from vertex 1? What algorithm do we know that would tell me who can I reach from vertex 1? Breadth first or depth first search, right? I find out who can I reach from vertex 1, right? And if it's strongly connected, I'd better be able to reach everybody. Does everybody agree with that? And then I've got to make sure from every vertex, can you reach everybody? So certainly doing n DFS or BFS operations would do that job, right? Does everybody agree with that? So that could solve my problem of am I strongly connected? In fact, there is a cleverer algorithm, more efficient algorithm, doing one depth first search. Any questions? Let me just show you the idea. If you want the details, they're in the book. Okay? Let's say I didn't really, okay. Let's say it's in the book, and I won't go do it. Okay? Any questions here? I didn't show you the picture I wanted to bring. Any questions here? Okay? Very good. Okay? One last thing I want to say about depth first search before we go and into other operations. So depth search is an important thing and a useful thing. And the other thing is that you're going to be seeing it again and programming it, in fact, when we get to backtracking. Okay? So depth-first search is important. You try to understand how depth-first search works, because in a few weeks we will talk about a backtracking as a way to search through all possibilities of something. That's what the programming contest problem will be about. Okay? In fact, depth-first search and backtracking are really the same kind of a thing. Both of them are going to be about advancing greedily as far as you can in the future, while remembering where you've been to make sure you systematically visit everybody. Okay? Any questions? So if you understand depth-first search, you will understand backtracking. If you don't understand backtracking, well, I guess you don't understand depth-first search. Okay, but hopefully they'll help you understand things together. Any questions? Any questions about depth-first search, why it's a good idea, anything like that? Okay. Let's now go, I'm sorry, again, unfortunately, I'm a little bit behind from what I had wanted to be, but I think it's good to go through these systematically. So let's start what, what would be the problem of today for today? Okay, I don't know if you guys looked at the problem of the day. Okay? The problem of the day now said the following. Your job is to arrange, you're given rambunctious children. Okay, now that I have 2 children, I know that they do operate this way. Okay? You are given a bunch of children, and you're given statements of the form, this child hates that child. Okay? Now, if you have a child here, okay, that is sitting forward neatly, this is child J, and here is child A, and they're sitting in desks, okay? What could this child do to torment that child? He could fire a spitball. You guys remember that at some point? Okay, you could do things to torment this person. Does everybody agree with that? How could we sit, okay, the children, okay, so that nobody torments anybody else? Anybody who hates somebody else can torment them, okay? One idea, of course, would be if you set them all, so none of them faced each other, right? You had a long, skinny room, okay? And they were all facing forward, right? Now nobody could torment each other, right? You can keep an eye on all of them. But you need a very wide room to do that. Everybody agree with that? Now the question is, your trouble is to arrange them in a line. Okay? And you now want to try to find, is there a line you can arrange these guys so that no child that hates another child is behind that person in line? How do we do this problem? Okay? Any ideas how we can do this problem? Okay? Yes. Okay, you're suggesting some kind of a way of doing it. Okay? I guess, what's your idea? You're giving me an algorithm. What I would like to say is, can you give me another name for this problem? Yes. Can't you just topologically sort them? Is this what the topological sort problem is? Disguise, right? Maybe not even that thick a disguise, right? We have a vertex for each child. And if I hate you, there is an edge from me to you. Does everybody agree with that? And if he hates him, and he hates him, everything's okay unless one of these guys hates back. Then you've got a cycle of hatred, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? So what is the algorithm for this? The best algorithm is the one you don't have to design. That is my feeling in life, okay? And graph algorithms are very tricky. There's a lot of there's subtlety to getting graph algorithms right. I'm pretty good with algorithm design. But I will tell you that I find a lot of graph algorithms are very subtle. The question of why they work or why they work, or that they don't work, is easy to get wrong. If I can reduce my problem to something that has a name, boom, I don't need to design it anymore. Does everybody see that? So the problem of, is there a way to organize the line? Or tell me it's not possible. Just say topological sort, and that's done. Does everybody see that? Any question? It is a very honorable thing to use somebody else's algorithm. It is more honorable than trying to say, well, if I organize this before that, it's going to be okay, and this guy, it's complicated. You might make mistakes, okay? I have a hard time proving correctness. But saying it's something that's correct in the book, no arguments with that. Any questions about it? Questions? It's possible that there's cycles of hatred. If there is a cycle of hatred, is there any way of organizing the people in a line? There's no hope for that at all, is there? Right? It's asking us to organize them in a line. What? Oh, you're saying put people between them. You know, people, one thing I know about spitballs, they can be shot a long way. Does everybody agree with that? It doesn't necessarily mean the case. Maybe I hate him, okay? And you'll say, oh, I'll put some other kids in the way. Well, what am I going to do? If I hate him enough, I'm going to find a way to hit him. Okay? So that's what this is sort of saying. You're saying like that, maybe your formulation is, I can only annoy the student if they're right in front of me. Does everybody agree with that? Any questions? Okay, well, that's interesting now. Okay, yeah, I respect that. You're saying you read it that way. How would we solve your version of the problem? Let's think about how we might solve that problem. That's how tricky. Maybe even a very hard problem. What is your version of the problem? You're saying, to still build our graph of hatred. And what you want to do is to make sure that there is an ordering such that there is no hatred between successive people. Does everybody agree with that? That's what your problem is. Okay? Is there a way to state your problem in a graph theory terms? Okay? If I was thinking about this problem, okay, does anybody see how to solve his problem? To avoid immediate hatred. How would you do that one? You're saying what? Graph coloring. You would say that I'm going to want to color it so that, again, there's a neutral person or something. You sort of have an idea that maybe there's neutral people and hostile people. And so long as you have neutral people between them. The trouble is, just because I'm serving as a neutral person between him and him doesn't mean that I'm a neutral person. I want to get my hands on this guy. Okay? So there's not really a sense of neutral and non-neutral people, right? There's a sense of people, everybody being frustrated because they can't hurt the people they want to hurt. Okay? Any questions how you would solve this one? Yeah? You're saying do swaps to try to organize this thing. You're saying that if I come up with an arbitrary order and swap, if I can hurt this guy and want to hurt him, swap it so that we aren't next to each other. There's no guarantee to me that you're going to find an ordering where you break these things, right? Because when you swap these two, you might create other trouble. Does everybody see that? This one looks tricky, okay? Any ideas how to solve this one? Well, there may be, how much hatred can there be? Note that there can be a great deal of hatred going on, but still have a legal ordering, right? Suppose, let's say, we had a line like this, where we had n guys, one after the other, and except for this, every possible relation of people who hated each other, every other possible relation of guys who were not neighbors, really did hate each other. You could have a tremendous number of feuds, yet still have a way to do it to satisfy your idea that I am not next to somebody who I hate. Does everybody see that? You could have an edge with a graph with n choose 2 minus n edges. If they're the right edges that are missing, you might still be able to do this. Any questions? How would I do this problem? Okay, and I'm going to pull out a little bit of magic maybe, which we'll come up with later in the semester. My first vision is I would start with a different graph. You have the hatred graph, right? I hate you. That's a hatred DAG, okay? Or a hatred relation. It's not clear it's a DAG anymore, right? Because there can be cycles of hatred so long as I avoid it, right? How about instead of building the hatred graph, I build the not hatred graph? Where I have an edge from me to you if it's okay for me to be in front of you. Okay? How would I build the not hatred graph from the hatred graph? It's the complement of the hatred graph, right? Does everybody agree that if I identified which pairs among you guys hated each other, I could construct the not hatred graph by simply taking all the pairs that are not in that graph, right? That's the complement. Okay? Any question? Now I claim the question is, given the not hatred graph, okay? Let's come back here. Given the not hatred graph, is there a path, okay, such that I visit every single vertex in the graph? Everybody agree with that? You're really asking me, is there a path in the non-hatred graph that visits every vertex? Okay? Any questions about that? Okay? And if this is a complete normal directed graph, actually this problem is NP complete. There's no fast algorithm known for it. Okay? If the not hatred graph is a DAG, then in fact there is a way to test whether or not there is such an orderer. Okay? Any questions about that? And we'll see why that is a little bit later. Any questions about it? Okay? So interesting problem. Any questions? Yes? Well, what you're saying is that if you're trying to do it like this. You're saying, okay, I hates J. We better put somebody between them. Who are we going to put in them? Put in Mikey. The trouble is that I hates Mikey. So who do we now put in? Well, Jethro. But Jethro, it turns out, hates Mikey. Okay? Mikey's not a very popular guy, is he? Okay? It's not clear to me that you solve problems. You solve an immediate problem, but it's not clear you solve a global problem. Does everybody see that? Any questions about it? Question? Well, if there is a cycle of hatred, I hates J, J hates K, I hates K. That's a cycle of hatred. If there are some benign people in the room who don't hate anybody, under your definition of hatred, remember you would tell me that you don't want me to be able to physically hit the guy in front of me if I hate him. Okay, my hatred can't span more than one person. Here I hates J, J hates K, K hates I. But there isn't, and here's A, B, and C who are peacemongers. What could I do? I hates I, A, J, B, K, C, I. Actually, no, that's all I need, right? Does everybody agree that would be a legal order even though there was a cycle of hatred? Any questions? So the cycle of hatred is impossible if there are long-range spitballs, if there's just an immediate action to hurt somebody. The problem actually, interestingly, becomes more complicated. That's actually the interesting point here. You might think it would be easier to solve the problem if I only have to find something to avoid an immediate hatred. Algorithmically, it turns out to be a harder problem. Okay? Any questions about that? Very interesting. Okay, I like that kind of digression. Any questions? Yes, you. So you're trying to say, can I add some information to the graph to say keep these two far away? Notice that you're building a path. The path is independent of the graph. The graph is the input data. The path is what you're building. You're not really adding anything to the graph while you're doing it, right? One's data, one is output. Any questions about that? Okay, interesting. Let's get back actually to the hatred problem. Maybe this is another one. Suppose that instead, okay, of trying to arrange it, before we talked about a line where we wanted to make sure that they were not, that all the hatreds, in fact, I guess actually went the other way, right? Does everybody agree with that? You wanted to have a line. Since if the hatred is the way the spitball would flow, if this is where the teacher is going, okay, you want to make sure that all the hatreds went in the other direction, right? We showed with a topological sort how to do it with a line. What if we wanted to instead find the smallest number of rows for the class, such that there is no relationship of the form I hate you and you are on a row ahead of me? Okay? Let's think about that. Okay? Suppose I want to minimize the number of rows. I have a DAG. If I didn't have a DAG, there would be no way to do it. I don't want to find an order, but I want to find a minimum number of rows. Okay? To pack people, such that all the people in this row, okay, that if I hate you, we had better be in rows going down that way. Any ideas how you might solve this one? Yes? You're saying if I does not hate J, who would I put in the top row? Well, who are the candidates to sit in the front row? Let's think about it this way. Who would be the candidates to sit in the front row? The ones who basically no one will shoot spitballs at. Okay, the direction of the edges may be a little confusing here, right? We want to avoid the possibility that there is someone who will shoot spitballs at them, right? And there is a collection of people whom no one will shoot spitballs at. Does everybody agree with that? Yeah? You're saying find all possible topological sorts. Why is that a dangerous thing to work on? Suppose I give you a list of n people, none of whom hate each other. How many possible topological sorts are there on n people where there is no hatred going on? Which orders are forbidden? There's no hatred between anybody. None of the orders, right? How many orders are there on n people? N factorial permutations, right? So if your algorithm says construct all topological sorts, you're instantly saying start by doing something that takes n factorial time. So that's a bad business, right? Does everybody agree with that? Yeah. You're saying that if you found the length of the longest hated path, where I hate you, you hate him, you hate him, you hate him, right? It's clear I need at least enough rows to put each guy in a different row. Does everybody see that? That I'm going to have to sort of turn it around so that if I hate this guy, if I want to forbid the spitballs from flowing, this guy, I have to order the rows so this guy does not face that. That's really it, right? It better be the case that this guy faces this way. This guy faces this way. Does everybody see that? So it's clear that if I have the longest path in that graph, in that DAG, is going to be the minimum number of rows. And what you would like to say is to stack up some of the other ones in that way. Okay? So there's an idea there that's going on. Any questions? Yeah. I think that in this argument, again, the problem seems unclear. Presumably, if I'm in the same row, I can still see you. You two guys could still shoot spitballs at each other. You couldn't shoot spitballs at the guy behind you. That's, I guess, implicit in this problem. Be in a lowered numbered row. Okay, any questions here? I think we've got some idea of the complexities of these things, okay? The other one we worked out in an interesting way, okay? I'll argue that there's some similar ideas in this problem, but I think I'd like to move on at this point. Any questions? Okay, very good. Okay. What I wanted to talk about as our next unit, okay, we have a few minutes. Let me at least introduce this, okay? We'll see it again. Is this idea of weighted graph problems, okay? So far, we've been talking about depth-first search and breadth-first search, right? And the problems that we have looked at, things like topological sorts, things like, is there a vertex whose deletion will disconnect the graph? Is there, what other problems did we look at? Is the graph strongly connected? None of these assume anything having to do with, is the graph weighted? Does everybody agree with that? Well, a lot of the graphs that we were dealing with are weighted, okay? And there is an alternate universe of graph algorithms for weighted graphs. So the data structure we're going to use for this is the data structure of is our adjacency list, where you're going to keep track of a weight field for every edge. This is the node for an edge in the adjacency list. How was it represented? Here was an edge in the X adjacency list. There was a node Y. This represented edge XY, right? By making this a record and tacking in a field with what the weight is, now we can represent edge-weighted graphs in similar size, similar adjacency structure than we had been used to dealing with. Okay? Any questions about that? So there's a class of problems we talked about on weighted graphs. What are those problems? Does anyone remember? What kind of things might you want to do on a weighted graph? Find the shortest path on a road. That would be a weighted graph problem. Any other weighted graph problems that people can think of? Okay. Just to introduce it for next time, the sort of mother of all weighted graph problems is something having to do with called the minimum spanning tree problem. Okay? Let's just introduce that question for a little bit. What is a minimum spanning tree? We agree that in any graph, a tree is a graph without cycles. That's something we agree. A spanning tree of a graph is a subset of edges that form a tree. Here is a graph. Does everybody see that graph? What is a spanning tree of it? Here is an example of a spanning tree of it. Does everybody agree with that? How can we find a spanning tree of an unweighted graph? Can anybody suggest an algorithm for finding a spanning tree, a subset of edges of a graph, that is a spanning tree? What would you say? You're saying do depth first. Maybe you're not saying it. But how do we visit all the vertices? What is our magic word? Yes? Breadth first search. If we did breadth first search, what did we have? Where was our spanning tree? Was our tree of discovery a tree? By definition, a tree of discovery is a tree, right? If we did depth first search, we also had a tree of discovery. Does everybody see that? So if I ask, given a graph, okay, find me a spanning tree of it, you could say DFS will do it or BFS will do it. Does everybody agree with that? Now, can there be more than one different spanning tree of a graph? And the answer to that is obvious. How can there be more than one spanning tree of a... What graph has only one spanning tree? Give me an idea of a graph that has only one spanning tree, yeah? A tree. If it's a tree, there isn't any flexibility on this, right? Does everybody see that? Ka-chunk. No spanning, one spanning tree, right? Suppose I add one other edge to this spanning tree. This tree. Now, how many spanning trees does this graph have? I added this one edge here, which went between. There's a cycle of 3 edges now. Does everybody agree with that? How many spanning trees are there for this graph? How many different spanning trees are there for this graph, which was a tree, but I added one edge to create a cycle of length 3? How many different spanning trees are there? I hear 2. I hear 3. How many spanning trees are there? Okay. How many ways can I delete edges from here and leave a tree? Okay. I claim I could delete this edge and leave a tree. Does everybody agree with that? Or I could put it back. Let me cover that up, right? And delete this one. Does everybody agree with that? And it's still it's still a tree, right? What I have left. Does everybody agree with that? Or I could do what? I could put this edge back and delete this one. Does everybody see that? So every graph can have many spanning trees. Okay? What we're going to look at next class, when we talk about minimum spanning trees, is how you find what in some cases is the most interesting one. Thanks for your attention. But also, your homework 2s are back here. Pick them up if you want them now. Thank you.